everyone, and thank you for attending our webcast today. My name is Rhea Kelly, and I'm Editor-in-Chief for Campus Technology. I would like to welcome you to today's event entitled Getting an Identity Right, Why Flexibility is Key to a Modern IAM Solution. This webcast is brought to you by Campus Technology and sponsored by Unicon. Formerly a back-office function, identity management has evolved into a foundational pillar of today's modernized IT strategy, driving both security and operational efficiency. But for colleges and universities, commercial identity solutions can lack the flexibility to address higher education's unique challenges efficiently and cost-effectively. In this fireside chat webcast, we'll speak with Unicon's Paul Spaude, IAM Software Engineer and Consultant, and David Mendez, Managing Director for Critical Infrastructure, about key considerations for implementing a modern identity solution, differences between open source and proprietary products, and what it takes to move a modernized identity solution forward on campus. But first, I'd like to review just a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to submit questions at any time. You can find that Q&A field to the left of the slide window. Type in your question there and hit submit, and we will field those questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties during the session, look for the question mark icon at the bottom of the presentation console, and you can click there for technical assistance. Finally, post-event, you will receive an email with a link to the recorded version of this event, so you can view it again or share it with a colleague. So let's get started. I thought we could start by having each of you introduce yourself and just give us a little bit about your background.
Sure, I can go first. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Dave Mendez. I'm the Managing Director of our Critical Infrastructure practice here at Unicon, where I oversee our cloud and identity services. My focus is strictly on helping higher education institutions implement solutions that not only address their technical needs, but also transform their business processes so that they can take full advantage of the solution that's put in place. In addition to my leadership role, I also serve as Unicon's principal architect and have been with the company for over 17 years now. Before that, I worked directly in higher education, managing IT departments and supporting the wide range of educational technologies there. Since 2009, I've been designing and implementing supporting cloud solutions for education, from small scale all the way up to enterprise level deployments, and am currently recognized by AWS certification as one of about 30 lead subject matter experts across the globe. Paul?
Oh, hey, my name is Paul Spaude. So I'm a software engineer, consultant, jack of all trades. I guess you call it an IAM architect. Been working with Unicon for over 10 years now, and designing, developing, and deploying identity solutions for a wide variety of higher educational and corporate institutions. Really, while my core is software engineering, as Dave mentions, we really like to take the holistic approach and work across the people, processes, and the software and technology boundaries to really, deliver solutions and make people's lives easier and secure.
All right, so I kind of want to get at the why of all of this. Why has identity become core to a modern IT strategy?
I'll take that one first, Paul. In my opinion, I think identity's it's core and foundational to any IT strategy because it establishes your trust and controls your access to resources. That becomes pretty critical, I feel, in higher ed, just for a security reason. I think back in 2023, I think they saw like a 70% rise in attacks. And usually an incident will cost an institution about $3.7 million on average. Those incidents usually stem from compromised identities, right? So that's not chump change. You really have to take identity seriously. You're trying to protect sensitive information for those constituents, the personal data, grades, etc. You're starting to now have to worry about a lot of regulatory compliance, FERPAs, GDPRs. And I think over the past few years, if you've worked in higher ed or just anywhere in the world, you have that shift. There's a lot of remote and hybrid work environments, and securing access for users across multiple devices, multiple locations, that's that's pretty complex, and to not take it seriously as just a solution that is just running there where they have users, passwords, etc. That won't work for you in this day and age. You have to integrate your identity management solution strategically into anything you plan for technology, and once you do that, I think that'll enhance your trust, security, your operational efficiency. Everything is based on identity. It isn't just something people use. It is something that is core to anything you're doing at your institution, proving who is who, what they're accessing, when, those types of information. You have to plan for this. Paul, thoughts on that? Anything I missed?
No, just to echo what you said, I mean, there's growing cyber insurance. I don't think there's a client out there that has been touched by ransomware at some point or heard of someone that's been affected by ransomware. So you have cyber insurance. So that means SSO probably for everyone, right? And MFA on top of that. And so now you have software, that identity software, that has to touch every facet of the institution. No longer can you let just some research department deploy a piece of software and be kind of unconcerned. Even when I was back at the university, we had a lot of hacks actually originate from like researchers doing those sorts of things, right? And as Dave mentions, your cost and the regulations are coming. So if you don't want identity to be part of your strategy, you're going to be forced to here in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, speaking of researchers and sort of rogue IT use, what are some of those unique challenges about identity management in higher ed, and particularly areas where commercial solutions kind of fall short?
Paul, you want to go first on this one? You want me to take it?
Yeah, no, it's really about flexibility is key, as we mentioned at the title of this talk. And also, higher ed is typically different than your corporate. And we'll just explain briefly why. You have a decentralized governing system of boards, right, and various parts of the institution that govern it. And that bleeds off into the organization of the university, right? You have different departments, colleges, maybe even a hospital associated, and all these sorts of things that integrate together. On top of that, you have, in a corporate environment, you have a set amount of employees. Now, that might be 2 million across the globe at a big company, but at a higher educational institution, you might have that number total, including alumni that you need to manage. Plus, you have about a couple 100,000 existing active people that you have to deal with. On top of that, those people can be federated. That means they may not belong to your institution. They might be parents. They might be applicants. They might be researchers coming in to do something with your institution. They might be presenters. They might be adjunct faculty or temporary faculty, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of special cases, gotchas, exceptions, and all those things kind of roll together. And that makes one tool, a corporate type tool, not usually a suitable fit. And so when you have a mind looking at your tools, you want to make sure it's flexible and can meet your needs today and also for the next 5 years. And a theme that I'll probably hit in this talk is knowing yourself. The biggest thing you can do to prepare for these things is really knowing your institution, documenting your IAM policies. David, any thoughts?
I think from my vantage point, what I deal a lot with in the day-to-day when I'm talking with C-level is that they've definitely faced significant challenges. It usually stems due to the fact that the current identity solution is fairly complex. There's institutional knowledge around. Only a couple people may know how it works. There's usually an integration of a lot of legacy systems that are still there at the university and the technology. I will harp again, the unique challenges. Many institutions we see struggle to fully understand their current solution. It's usually a mix of like scripts, few applications, different directories, may not be documented well. And that lack of clarity makes modernization difficult. And that becomes a unique challenge that we see just in higher ed. Another one I see that tends to creep up is staffing. IT teams in higher ed, if you work in higher ed, you already know they're usually stretched pretty thin They're trying to balance the daily operations they have to do with the need to innovate or add more features to something. You may have those legacy systems, like I mentioned, that are kind of critical to ongoing operations that usually fall outside the purview of an identity team, and usually require some sort of flexible solution to integrate with those. I see a lot too that happens at the C-level, where departments across the institution, they could be siloed, and that complicates modernization even more, I feel. Changes to one system inadvertently affect another one. There's interdependencies that may not be known, communicated, documented, and that makes it tough. I think what we have seen with a lot of our R1s that we work with, there could be a proprietary solution in place. It's suiting specific needs and specific challenges. It's addressing those that the school has, but may not have all of the flexibility that an institution wants to work with all of their custom workflows or all of their systems. And that's why, at least I feel like, you need a flexible solution. It's critical for you in identity, because it allows you to gradually modernize, align with your unique needs that you have at your institution. So that's the challenges I see typically. Those are the main three that I see that will make it tough in identity when you're trying to modernize.
So you both mentioned flexibility. Can we drill down into how you define that in an identity management platform? Because also I feel like most solutions, including the commercial ones or whatever, will claim to be flexible enough to deal with, some of those unique the identity challenges in higher ed, and people with multiple roles or all that stuff. So what does flexibility really mean, or what does it need to mean?
To me, I think I define flexibility in an identity solution as a platform that will be able to adapt to the unique requirements of an institution. There's not been an R1, as well as probably able to scale to meet all the future needs that they're going to have, right? There are often a lot of unique, if you work at higher ed, there is a lot of unique needs they have around identity, a lot of custom workflows, a lot of things they cannot or they can't get rid of at that point in time. There's such a diverse amount of systems that are involved, different directory servers, different types of SIS, CRMs, financial, LMSs. They all have to integrate seamlessly, right? You don't want users having to not be able to access something simply. So I think when it comes to flexibility, it's got to meet the current needs of an institution while being ready for future changes. You put in a new platform. I mean, take the example. This is kind of to the extreme, but if you were to replace your SIS or an ERP, the solution has to be flexible enough to keep working with your current system while you're modernizing with a new one, or you're trying to interface with a different system. My opinion is the open source platforms, they'll excel in those areas just because they're inherently adaptable to those types of changes. You can get in, you can make what you need to make work. Kind of avoids your vendor lock-in where you're not restricted sometimes to workflows. Helps you reduce costs too, I feel. There's no licensing fees tied to number of identities or integrations that may come up, and it lets you grow. Flexibility just lets you grow and adapt to new requirements, standards, regulations that you'll see, and allows you to stay in control of those. That's my definition. Long one, but there's a lot to consider when you're flexible. Yeah. Paul?
And it's a method of thinking too. A lot of people want one solution to fit them all, but you're often using multiple tools across boundaries, right? And you also have multiple tools deployed. So look at the best way to use them, the best way that you can condense systems, of course, and then maintain that flexibility for the future. I've seen a lot of these initiatives, right? They try to pare down, let's get rid of these legacy systems, and we're going to go to this, maybe a commercial system, whatever it might be, and we're going to pare down all our people process. Let's say you actually succeed at that 100%, right? That might be only true for the next 2 to 3 years, right? How did those people processes come about in the first place, right? Things were added, things change, right? Institutions evolve organically, and things don't stay static. So picking for today doesn't always help you tomorrow, as it were. So yeah, just keep in mind flexibility in both in thinking and also in the software that you're deploying, but also keep in mind that one thing may not do it all for you.
Yeah, that's the thing.
All right. So if you're looking at implementing a modern identity platform, whether it's commercial or open source, um, could you sort of break down the key considerations? Like what do you need to make sure that you're covering or keeping in mind, and how do you make those decisions?
Do you want to go first, Paul? This one? Probably got some good thoughts
Yeah.
on that one.
So you, one thing here is you're trying to look at how do I not reinvent the wheel, as it were, but also the harder part here is the people processes and the change management. That's very hard at institutions. And you often can't flip a switch and say, okay, we're not doing this anymore. We're starting over and we're doing it this way. Even if that were true, you're going to get a lot of people that have pushback, people that have done it that way for 30 years. So you have to be cognizant of change management, getting buy-in. When you're integrating with the legacy systems, what you want to do is make sure that you have a way to accommodate them now, remove them later, and accommodate what might come forward. And to do that, you have to have flexible software, of course, but also good documentation, good processes around it, good tests, building in tests, building in ways that you can kind of document some of these people flows and processes. And when you do that, you're going to have a much easier time and able to kind of say, okay, here's what I had, here's what I have. And then in the future, when someone comes over 10 years from now, when you all have left, at least they have some documentation to point them what you did and why, and the crazy things that you did today, that they're going to complain about tomorrow, as we always say.
I think I have a couple key considerations. I feel, first, I feel that implementing a modernized identity solution, it's usually a longer term effort, and it impacts the entire institution, right? It impacts everybody. This isn't something that you can just say, oh, we're going to put into place. That just sets you up for failure, in my opinion. It's a longer term effort, and it has to be considered. It isn't something you're going to get done in 3 months or 5 months. Not the full governance, solution, management, security. It's just, especially when you have a complex system. I do feel that you have to think, as Paul says, you got to be flexible of what you want to change, what you don't want to change. But usually what I also have seen in consideration is people want to drop some system that's legacy right away. And the problem is, again, I think I mentioned this before, you don't know what you don't know yet, right? How disruptive will that be? Those systems usually need to remain operational for your current solution, and usually have to be seamlessly interacting with this new solution to avoid disruptions to users for your identity. Another one I see that's considering is that kind of doesn't get as much attention immediately until later on in the project is I think executive leadership, you got to be able to know that you're going to back this project, because again, it's institution wide. It will affect things. And when you have some departments that may be siloed, you have departments, you have areas that don't know who's doing what, you kind of need that higher level leadership to be involved and bridge that gap in communication, kind of set that shared vision goal of, hey, we're going to do this. We want you to do this. This is important to the institution. It'll probably be a phased implementation approach that'll help you reduce disruptions. I think as Paul mentioned, as you take this into consideration, as you start to modernize and you start to understand your current solution, you start to document what the new stuff is. That helps with your staff turnover. That helps when you're onboarding folks. You have to have that communication across the entire time. We've seen it where if communication isn't happening, again, it's a longer term project. People are going to come, people are going to go, things are going to change. You're going to find out new things that are happening in your solution or what you want to do. Clear communication while this is all happening is a consideration too that sometimes is left to the side. You have faculty, you have staff, you have alumni, you have your students. It's having communication about what's going on while you're modernizing. That's key to managing your expectations and ensure everyone's informed so they know what to expect and where to go to if there's something happening. You obviously want to consider financial stuff too, but that goes without saying. You're trying to make sure what your costs are going to be if it's a longer term project, not just year one, but year 5, right? What are your costs going to be? There are all considerations I usually work with at the C level when something like this is going on. Yeah.
What would you say are the most effective arguments for getting that leadership buy-in and also like sustaining it over such a long project?
That's a good question. The most successful argument I see is, do you want to, again, moving to a modern identity solution is not going to be something cheap. It's a longer term project. It's going to cost the institution a lot of money. So do you want to spend all that money and fail? That's usually the key right there, right? You don't want to spend all this money and not show progress or not have people know what's going on, because they could block you. You can't go. A certain department might, hey, I can't integrate with you. I didn't even know this was happening, right? And so they have to sustain it. It's usually a financial impact for them, and that becomes very, very, very important, right? You don't want to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars, some cases millions, it depends on the size of your institution, and fail. That's the executive leadership. They have to understand that a higher ed institution, people have been working there a long time, most of the time, right? Or you have some new ones that have come in, but they all have their processes, they all have their systems, they're all responsible for certain things. And their main concern is they just want to do their jobs. They want to get things done. And if they don't know what's going on and they don't have that higher level leadership saying, this is what we're working towards, that has a big financial impact down the road. You don't want to waste that money. So that's usually what I see. That's usually the argument for it right there.
Yeah. Are there any other common mistakes that can really derail a project like this?
You would go first, Paul, or me on that one?
Yeah, there's so many, right? And it does, vary per. I think the biggest one Dave mentioned though was your scope, your budget, right? Your time, effort, and a lot of that's more just not the money; it's the time investment, right, of your personnel, your people, and what it's going to take. And many institutions are in a rock and a hard place, right? They got to modernize now and get a new identity management system, but they have no time, they have no staff, and they have no budget. So really, it is a hard situation. But if you do those buy-ins, those change management communications, you take it one step at a time, and especially really prepare before you do it and document what you have, you can be quite successful. A pitfall though is probably not understanding what you have. And it's not in a bad, so some people have a good mantra about, okay, I'm going to build this new greenfield thing. Great, right? It is a time to redo things, make people processes better, make automation happen, make better reporting, auditing, security, all those great things that we love, right? But you really got to understand where the institution's at currently, both the old software, if you can, and the people, processes, and the things. And I think the biggest failure that I have is people have, whether it's because of one of these things we talked about, artificially limited their requirements, right? They're limiting the scope that they're actually operating under. So they deploy something and it only meets 20%, 10% of the needs, and then they get stuck and they can't really, push it past that, and the project fails, and then they get into a cycle oftentimes of they try something else out, and then next 5 years they try something else out, and it's just a spiral of people leaving and not happy, right? So you really understand what you have, understand the scope of what you're going to undertake, and be committed to it.
Yep, the commitment's big. The common ones I typically see in a large modernization project are kind of touched on some of these. Usually executive leadership either not fully supporting it, or it's just kind of like, hey, we want to do this, and it's off to the side. But again, with what we've talked about before, I think that support at that level is critical for aligning departments, getting collaboration going, understanding that shared vision. The other biggest one I see is, Paul touched on, is just not fully understanding the current system and the desired outcomes they want when they select a solution. That usually leads to a poor decision of what you're trying to do, and usually sets you up for a failure, which you don't want to do, right? Fully understanding what you are running, your processes, your workflows, the technologies involved, what you're talking to, that's very key. Another common mistake I see is some unrealistic expectations that are put on staff resources. Again, I've kind of touched that. They're already stretched thin, especially the identity team. That's usually a niche area of technology at an institution, right? How this all works is usually very, very niche and institutionalized to a few people. They're trying to still run it. I mean, you can't just pull these people off and not do their jobs of what they're trying to do anyway with providing services to their identity solution or helping users working through those things. You kind of have to plan for those constraints. Again, it's longer term, right? You have to plan for those constraints, get help when you need it, and work through it. Again, I think I touched this too. Communication's the other one I see. There's not usually a constant flow of communication above teams or stakeholders. That usually derails progress. You can address all of these. They are easier to address, and being that I've worked in higher ed too, I do understand sometimes things run a little slower. There's a lot going on, so getting buy-in, getting approval, that takes a while. But understanding your environment, that's a common mistake. You have to understand it before you move on. Definitely.
Yeah, in terms of understanding your current environment and processes and all of that, is that something that that universities can look to a partner to help assess all of those things, or is it something they have to like make an effort to nail down all that stuff on their own?
No, that's where you get a partner. Again, I think that comes back to the time constraint, right? It's very hard for them to go in, but it's a lot easier if you have an experienced partner or an unbiased, and especially one that's unbiased, that's saying, hey, what are your goals that do these? What do you want to call them? An evaluation? What do you want to call them? Assessment? You choose your term. This is where you come in to try to have someone that's experienced, knowing, okay, we've been through this before. We've done this quite a bit for clients. We understand higher ed. We understand what you're probably running into. And you start working through that. You start to help them figure out, what are you running? What are the team? What are the constituents you've got to bring in? What are the key partners? Who should be the executive stakeholder? Who's the leaders in all of this? Yes, definitely. You want to bring in a partner to help you. That's hard to do if you're working daily operations, trying to, sitting there trying to figure it all out, go through it. It's a lot easier for a partner to come in and schedule time, set some people up, answer some questions that are fairly common that we could use to figure out processes, figure out systems, and then try to put something together like, hey, this is your workflow. This type of solution will work well for you, right? Whichever one would fit that based off the needs. So yes, definitely getting a partner to help you is a big deal, I think, in that situation, especially, again, it's not a small project. This is a larger project, and you had to invest in it. You've got to do it the right way to be successful. Paul, anything? No? Okay.
No, I think you hit everything on the head there. Yeah, there are partners out there that can help you. I would definitely look to that. Also, you can look at setting up in the mind of a parallel team. I mean, the problem is that your team today has to maintain it, right, while they're developing a new system. And any way you can free up resources or get different resources to implement while the existing is being maintained really will help you out. And there's a variety of ways to do that. And also, I guess just to point out, I mean, a lot of these solutions, especially newer ones, are touting automation, right? And they're touting perhaps software as a service, or it doesn't matter, that reduce time, reduce costs, right? Same with the cloud. But realize there always is a cost, there always is a time, and nothing's ever going to be 100% automated. So, just remember that. And you are building up a new IAM, for the future, right? Your software, your practice, your procedures. So you want to, like Dave said, do it right and document it and make sure that you got everything ready to go. Obviously, there's ways to start very small too. I want to point that out at that. We're talking about a huge shift here and all this stuff, but I don't want to scare people, right? There are ways to start with a proof of concept, MVP, that sort of thing, agile, if you want to use those terms. There's lots of ways to do that. And again, partners can help you with all that too, if that's what you need. But realize there's a lot of ways to get started. You don't have to do the whole thing. It's a slow process, an iterative process. But keep in mind that you're just going to have some time constraints on your team, and you still got to have that maintenance, right? You still got to have that existing system running. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up to a lot of other things. Obviously, people complain. That's the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, with the time constraints, what would you say to institutions that say, we don't have the staff resources or skills to manage an open source solution?
That's actually what we answer quite a bit with clients. At first, that concern's valid. It's valid. That's not something to sugarcoat. It's a valid thing, but it's manageable. Historically, I think open source solutions, it's like, oh, we've got to run it on our own. We've got to do it ourselves. It's going to take time, et cetera. I don't want to do that. Even though I could get all of the customization to meet my unique needs, it's going to take too much time, and I don't want to do that. Regardless of how inflexible they're flexible, right? They can do anything you want them to do if you just put the effort into it. But they're resource intensive to manage in-house. So I think now, though, the good news is that you don't have to do it alone. Institutions no longer have to do that alone. So there was a few years ago, we had a lot of clients asking us, could you guys come up with a product that does that for us, so we don't have to do it? We can get all the flexibility of the open source system, but we don't have time to do the implementation, the hosting, the upgrades. And so that's where we came out. There was our product's called Navigate Identity, and it handles everything. It gives you a SaaS-like experience, much like the proprietary tools would, right? You use the interfaces, you do everything, and a company handles all of everything else you need: the upgrades, the application upgrades, the integrations, the security, the compliance, the scalability, the performance. So those partnerships now, when you do that with a vendor that can handle the open source stuff, you get the adaptability of the open source platform without needing all that extensive in-house expertise, right, of how to manage and run it. Frees that staff up to focus on helping deliver their daily operations to all the constituents. And typically, it's just my opinion that when it fits right, when it fits your institution right, an open source solution that's flexible, you combine it with a good partner that's cost effective, it's future proof, it's scalable, specifically for higher education, right? Because the open source solution software that handles identity, that was built by higher ed people for higher ed education, right? This isn't something that was just, hey, it's out there, that it should work. This addresses the years and years of unique needs and requirements that a higher education institution has. And so, again, it's a manageable thing. You get with a partner, you try to work this, to work it out with you, and you have a nice solution working that. You never have to worry about it. It's not going to do X or Y. You can take care of those things. So, any thoughts, Paul, on that?
Yeah, I mean, and that time crunch is a real problem. And I would say, I'd posit this question, if I don't have the resources or time to do open source without like a partner or something making it easier, you don't have time or resources to do closed source either, right? There's hidden costs involved with both, and they are very similar, right? One might be a little more frustrating to get started and run without, some service or something, but the others hide their complexity in different ways, and you're tacking on like functions as a service, scripts, or other things around, usually because they're on a Rails or they're less functionality per se, right? And so you're building in a whole knowledge, you're building a tribal knowledge of how to work with the new tool. There's a lot of things that goes into it. So whatever you can do as a C-level or as a manager or as someone that has control of your team to help your team and encumber them, so all they have to do is learn that tribal knowledge and do the IAM administration and a little bit of the deployment and such like that. That's what you want to work towards if you can, right? Make the best use of your team's time. And I haven't heard from a client anywhere, and I hear I'm in industry groups and things like that everywhere. I mean, even in corporate, everyone's dealing with reduced staff, and the staff has to do multiple jobs. So whatever you can do to uncover your staff and give them, get them to do just the things they need to do without a lot of manual work, right? That's another thing that happens with these is I deploy the solution, but I got to still do all these manual exceptions, manual things, manual tracking. Try to get rid of that as much as possible to keep your team. There's also like, staff aug, right? So there's things out there, partners out there that do that sort of thing. And we're one of them too, but it that could fill in for a while to help you get up on your feet. There's a lot of things out there, but I think this is staffing, unfortunately, is an existential crisis in higher ed, in many corporate institutions too. And I'm not sure if there's a light at the end of the tunnel on this one. I'm sure it goes in cycles, but yeah, right now, just think about 10, maybe 20 years ago, these institutions would have developers on staff. There'd be no problem deploying this open source. They just whip it out, right? And they're already deploying apps and stuff for other parts at the institution, doing custom web apps and things like that. Many still do, but it's it's very rare that I run into that anymore today. I mean, they just lost all their staff. And when Dave says niche, IAM departments on average can be 1 person to 10 people, that I see. I think that's probably the amount. So just realize, that's what you're dealing with. And any way to leverage your people and expand the power and get them to do what they need to do faster, make use of it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for just navigating that decision, whether to go open source or go proprietary, and kind of how to determine what's best for your unique institution?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell this to a lot of C-levels when I'm talking to them. First off, yeah, like you have to start doing this. You have to understand the current identity solution. We've kind of touched on that. What works, what doesn't, what the goals are going to be, right? Got to evaluate, know your workflows, the data exchanges, your people processes. There is a lot of upfront work in that, right? You need that information before you decide whether you're going to use a proprietary, deploy an open source one with a partner, et cetera. That upfront effort will save you so much time. It'll be the most cost efficient, and it will align with your needs. You want a solution that aligns your needs. What I've seen happen before is someone gets caught in by a sales pitch or a quick demo, and hey, I love that. Let's go do that, and not do that upfront work to understand what your current needs are and how your current solution works. Again, what can change, what doesn't. I think the selling point, of course, on open source is, especially now that you have partners that can provide this and take care of a lot of stuff for you, they're a great option for institutions that need that flexibility, right? They have so many customizations going on, or so many unique things they have to do, whether it's with account claiming, whether it's with security response. There's so much stuff, right? Those open source platforms are a great option for that, right? They're future proof. There's no lock-in, cost effective. Again, there's no licensing fees tied to users. They help because if internal resources are limited, someone does that. But another thing that we see that we're not saying someone shouldn't do a proprietary. We've seen schools that works for them, right? I mean, that's fine. It fit their needs. They knew what they needed. They went with that, and it's excellent. We've seen there where it doesn't, so they kind of do a hybrid approach, right? They have one where they have a proprietary one performing certain functions because it made their life easier, but they still are using a third party or multiple third party tools, open source wise, to accomplish these workflows that they couldn't implement in a proprietary one, right? And that's because they didn't quite know everything that was happening. They just jumped into an implementation thing. Ultimately, I think you have to understand your current solution, do a data-driven decision there, engage the stakeholders that you know, which happens after you figure out how your whole solution is working. Come up with your goals and go from there, and then you choose the right one, right? You choose the right one that will future-proof you, scale, make sure that it meets the needs, the product that best meets all the needs you're going to be concerned about. That's the key. That's the key. But you got to know how things are working in your current solution to make that choice. And if you don't do that work, it's like throwing a dart, and you hope you hit something that works for you. So, Paul, you got anything on that? Anything?
Yeah, and keep in mind too, a lot of these tools will work on paper to meet the needs, right? It's just how well does it, how flexible is it, and all of that. And one thing to keep in mind is open source it's not, I'm not going to say free, right? It's cheaper, right?
Right.
And because there's a cost of terms of personnel and building up your knowledge around it, deploying it, and so on. But remember that open source is free to try. So why not give it a try? Like do a POC or something and see how it works for you. Also, keep in mind, some people do the best of both worlds, right? I already have Entra, right? I'm deploying Office 365 and doing all this stuff. well, why don't I use that with some of the open source tools? Now I got both. I don't have 2 licenses for 2 different tools. I got 1 license ish, there's many different layers into that onion. And then I have the open source doing the backing for it, and we found a lot of success with that too. So just keep your mind open. But I feel for decision makers out there, because it's a hard decision, right? And you don't get a lot of info. You just get it from the sales process and that sort of thing. But that's where kind of open source shines. Like I tell people, I'm brutally honest. Whether I'm doing an assessment or I'm doing a POC with you, we're going to do it. We're going to do it the way that it works in that open source tool. And then you're going to be at the end left to decide, oh yeah, does that work for me or not, right? And we're going to move on. So yeah, you might not have all the info to make that decision. It's hard, right? You don't know this tool works better than that tool until I actually pay for it. But give open source a try. Start small, right? Especially if you found ways to get time on your team to do these things, right? And deploy them and learn them, and or pick partners that help you with it. But yeah, that's my suggestion there.
Yeah, again, it goes back to that flexibility, right? Be flexible in what you're trying to do. Don't get locked into something. Be flexible. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to try something new. There's what's interesting about the open source products. What a lot of institutions realize is that there's a nice, good community of that out there. And we're not talking these are just smaller schools. These are large R1s that are running these open source identity solutions, and it's a community. You can talk, you can figure out what's happening. There's ways to get features added, and you have to be flexible. It's a mindset, like Paul mentioned earlier, not just technical, but on a mental state. Be flexible with what you want to do, because the end goal is you want a secure, modernized identity solution that's meeting all the needs you need that you have for your institution. So.
And I'm also reminded it's kind of been buried the last probably 5-10 years, with commercial SaaS. I think people are used to the Googles, the Microsofts, the Apples of the world. But keep in mind, higher education was open source first. They're highly collaborative. SAML2, SSO protocol, CAS, all those things came out of higher ed first. And so while we're in a model of SaaS and commercial offerings and things like that, right? Higher ed has its roots in open source. I'm sure they'll go back. It cycles, right? They'll go back to that one day. So keep in mind that too, right? Open source allows me to collaborate with other institutions, right? And there is no real competition other than, friendly competition in football and sort of things. But there are large groups out there where people meet and talk about these tools and add features and talk about the best ways to do things. And it's pretty powerful. You don't get that in other things.
Mm-hmm. I want to pause here and just remind everyone that there's still time. If you'd like to submit a question, look for that Q&A field to the left of the side window. Type in your question there and hit submit. And of course, we want to get as many of your questions answered as we can. You both, I wanted to go back to the change management aspect. How do you recommend the best way to encourage people to adopt new processes? Because it seems like process change is a big part of it, but maybe not all at once. Any advice there?
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, it's a good question. Again, this is if you've worked in higher ed, you'll understand the statement that implementing change in an institution can be very challenging. You have people who have been there a long time. They know what they're doing. That getting it across the institution can be a very challenging aspect. It's unavoidable. There's one thing to understand: change is unavoidable when you're doing a new identity platform, or regardless, any new solution, really. Changing those entrenched people processes, that's harder sometimes than the technical. I think this is, again, I'm going to go back to this because this is where I deal a lot within the day-to-day. Is this is where the executive leadership again comes into play, right? To foster that change. Change is important. You want to bring those teams together. You want to have that shared vision, have that communication going. That's usually what we see on the change management side. That's where you're trying to communicate, hey, we're going to do a phased rollout. Hey, we understand this is going to take a long time, right? We're not expecting to get it done in 4 months or 5 months. Getting training in place for people so that they can feel comfortable using the new solutions, using the new processes. usually what we tend to find out in a lot of our projects is that there's initial resistance to the change, right? There's initial resistance. Once they realize it's an important aspect of implementing a new system and they show them there's a new way to do something and it makes their job easier, that's a big key. It makes their job easier to do. Then it all of a sudden you get a lot of excitement going on. But if you're not communicating out how that's going to be, how it's going to make their job easier, more efficient, that's where it becomes very difficult. So, Paul, any thoughts on that one that she asked?
Yeah, and you got to realize where people are coming from here. I mean, I think a lot of higher education, you're reactive, right? You're reactive to today, this thing broke, this thing changed, this thing did this. Every department is like that, right?
Yep.
And so when you get into this initiative, it's just, oh no, not yet again, right? Last year, it probably wasn't your fault, but something in your software broke something and it made their life miserable, right? So you got to contend with a lot of that animosity. As Dave mentioned too, I think sometimes at institutions, sometimes you can't avoid it, right? Certain parts of security make life harder, right? You can't get away from that. But there's also a sentiment of, oh, now you're adding another thing that I have to deal with, right? Or another thing that I can't do my job with. So you just got to be cognizant of that thing. And really, when you try to architect or engineer a solution, as we call it, for make it easier for people and as best as you can, right? And I think a lot of the teams at a university or organizations are used to, what makes my life easier, but not considering the others. And that's why, when we do our IAM evals and we talk across departments, and you just see a lot of that come out, right? And a lot of people, oh, I didn't realize you did that. Oh, I didn't realize this. And like Dave said, getting that buy-in of that, oh yeah, okay, we're going to make things better, right? Or at least I was heard, and you can try to make my life easier somehow, right? Even that's important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have a great question that just came in. Do you recommend checking out any particular open source solutions? Maybe you could kind of briefly break down what some of those options are.
Paul, you want to do the breakdown of the ITAP? You want to go there?
Yeah. So there's a group out there called Internet 2, and you can go look them. They're well known, been around a long time. So they created the Trusted Access Platform, and it's a collection of open source tools out there that is like an IAM solution. It's full solution, and it has almost everything you need, right? And there's some newer things like privileged access management, some things like that, right? That it doesn't have, but those are solutions that you probably already have. And so it has a shibboleth IDP, which is your SSO, and this has been around since the beginning of SAML 2, and it's set up, designed for higher ed and federation. And so that means in Common Federation, you might have heard of them. UK Federation are big federations where you might not have credentials at the university that you're at, but you have it at somewhere else, and they're able to sign in if you allow that. Same thing is you might have a vendor you're working with. They're already a part of that federation, so their metadata is in there. You don't have to do anything extra to accommodate them, adding that application to your institution beyond maybe just double checking some attribute release and that sort of thing. It gets more into research and scholarship and other things like that. And it can work with MFA like Duo. You can delegate out to other IDPs such as Azure or Entra, and you do all sorts of things with it. So, and it's pretty flexible. Then there is on the IDM part of it, so identity management part of it, there is co-manage and midpoint. Co-manage is mostly set up for your virtual resource organizations and also kind of external identities, but it has lots of other niche features and matching and sort of thing. And then there's midpoint, which is by Evolvium. That's a full IAM system as well, without the SSO part, but you can integrate it with SSO. You bring your identities in, it provisions them out, it does attestation, auditing, all that great stuff that you want. Inside of higher education for a long time, there's been a product called Grouper, and that's actually purpose-built for governance and administration, and in particular, delegating out the governance and administration from the IAM team into the disparate groups that we're talking about here, that we've mentioned multiple times today. And getting that off the plate of someone central and making central policies. You still can have them, but then you're putting that into the hands of the people. And it's just groups. It's group math. It breaks up complex ideas very simply and in a nice UI with a visualizer. And so while midpoint and even co-manage can do part of that, but Midpoint can do that as well. You actually use them together for a really powerful tool, especially at the R1, big level. And then, so we mentioned co-manage, mentioned Shibboleth, we mentioned all of them. And so what you want to do is often, you want to use parts of them together. And so the Internet 2 has the Workbench. We have the Navigate offering where we put them together for you, host them for you. Those are things that you get them together, and you can have these products interact and provide a full-featured IAM system. Again, these tools have been around in higher ed for over, I believe all of them are over 10 years. So Midpoint's probably the youngest one at 10, a little bit over 10 now. But these have been around for a long time. And so they've been battle-born, tested, they're upgraded. They have a strong community across all of them, mailing lists. There's Slack channels with Internet 2. There's working groups, which I like attending. I'm there with you. And so there's a lot of cool things that you get with the ITAP platform.
Yep, that's the cool.
Great. I love this next question because, man, I feel your pain. Thoughts on making a case for action? We have a complex homegrown IAM solution that works, but is hard to change and has lots of risks. But IAM is so behind the scenes that leaders have a hard time understanding the importance. What are good strategies to communicate the importance of IAM to the institution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that is very common, believe it or not. That homegrown one, again, I'll go with the strategies first. Again, you are absolutely right, who's ever asked that question. Usually what happens is people outside of the identity team or even the IT team don't realize how important identity is, right? They just don't realize it. And that's not to their fault. They just don't get it. To them, they're just typing in their stuff and they're accessing things. The strategy I've seen that has been successful trying to communicate that up is you begin to show, again, this is the one I've seen be successful. The identity team needs to communicate, hey, we are falling behind. That is a security issue for us. There is a financial impact to the university if we do not keep this up. And you bring your stats in, you work with a partner to get those stats if you need them, right? Like I just mentioned, I mean, $3.7 million on an incident breach to a school, that's a lot of money. And you don't want that happening. That is usually the strategy I see successful, because you're right. An executive may not have any idea of how important identity is. And that's true. That wouldn't be their job, right? It's the job of those teams to come up with that data saying, if we don't do this, these are the risks that we're going to have. And that's the information that's important to an executive, right? You could talk all you want about, it'd make us more efficient, it'll free up resources. Those are the side effects what happens. But the strategy that I've always seen work when you're doing this, especially with a custom homegrown system, because that will take time, right? Is there is a financial impact. A subsidiary to that is that if person X leaves, we can't provide services to our constituents. We will no longer be able to access this because no one knows how this works, right? That comes back to your staff limitations, but that's a subsidiary I see with the financial one. That's the strategy I've seen always be successful when trying to get the backing for this, especially with a homegrown system like that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see here. I think I'm going to go with this sort of forward-looking question. What trends or concerns are folks seeing sort of moving forward in IAM and higher ed?
Paul, you go.
Yeah, regulations are coming. So that kind of goes back to Dave's last answer in the question. So regulations are coming, whether GDPR, a lot of things out of Europe that probably, will happen over here eventually in some form. And you also have the updated NIST guidelines out there. So all of these things are going to make IAM more of a requirement if they aren't already, right? Cyber insurance and MFA, there's all these things that are going on. So the trend is more IAM, right? And inside of IAM, the trend is trying to do the job better or more automated, I would say. Also, the trend is giving data, so audits, reports, that sort of stuff to make compliance easier. So that I think is going to be the theme. You're going to hear a lot about AI, right? In this and that. AI has been around in IAM for a long time in various forms. So We'll see what kind of approach it takes. But that is not on the highest ticket for me. It's really that how does it make compliance auditing, all these things that universities are going to have to do or already doing, make it easier for them, make you a little bit more secure and that sort of thing. Inside of specific trends, obviously passwordless is hot right now. Yeah, so we see a lot of things with that. I do see a lot of concerns though with it around accessibility, help desk support, lost devices, things like that. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind around passwordless. Sometimes having a password and the MFA, the second factor as the MFA device, gives you a little bit of benefits. So you always got to consider both sides when you're moving towards something like that. But that is something that's increasing. You have the concept of zero trust. So it's a thing that came out of, Google and the DoD, all these other stuff are adopting it. Technically kind of came out of higher ed first, like most things too. But really higher ed is now embracing that zero trust because they have to. They're using cloud-based solutions and on-prem, and you can no longer just, keep this VPN and keep everything sheltered underneath it. Plus ransomware and all this other stuff is happening. So zero trust and looking at doing that. And along that comes, I already mentioned it, but privileged access management. That's a whole cadre of tools, CyberArk, things like that you probably heard of. But those are up and coming and already deployed, trying to keep all these cloud credentials and all these credentials secure, right? And rolled over and managed for people. So you'll see those kind of trends taking action. Another one is the core of identity itself, right? IAM. Mm-hmm. You got to consider, well, you're talking about passwordless, you're talking about this and that. We still have a problem verifying it's me, right? And think about COVID and what everyone went through when they went virtual. Now you might have an international student that never steps foot on your campus to verify themselves, let alone they don't have SSN or all the traditional stuff to verify themselves that we here in the US have. So, there's actually a crop of identity verification companies propping up now to do it virtually, kind of like a background employer check, in the corporate world. So that's something to watch for, to see how those kind of morph and get kind of flowed into the onboarding flow, as it were, at an institution. But largely the trend is automation as much as possible, taking advantage of newer resources and newer interoperability. So I think that's a key one.
Anything you want to add, Dave?
No, he's hit all the points. The trends are the trends. He's hit all the points there, definitely. That's what we
Love
see.
it. All right, I think we have time to squeeze in one more here. The approach to implementing a new identity and access management solution, is that a parallel implementation or a forklift replacement?
Good question. I'll go first, Paul.
Yeah.
That typically happens in a parallel process. So again, what we go back to is as you're starting to implement, you figure it out. Your current system has to keep running, right? And then you do the phased implementation approach. So the new one starts coming into play. And those decisions could be like, starting with this freshman class that are in this, right? There's different strategies for that, but it becomes more of a parallel one. And then you cut over, right? If you're able to, with time and money, you definitely could try to bring one up and have it all working, tested, et cetera, encompassing and then switch over. But we typically see the phased one happen. And that's usually what we see. That's usually the successful one. Paul, is that what you typically see as well?
It's pressed on two factors. One is you need test environments to do that, right? Really good test environments, no matter what. But the second one is some things are really hard to duplicate. For example, Entra might not give you another tenant, right? Google may not give you another, some people have, but it's hard, right? Costs money. Some other services, you only get one. That's it. You get one shot at it. So again, that gets into flexible tools that can help you simulate things or do things before you do them, right? And testing and all of that. But just keep in mind that you might have to do a hybrid. So you might go parallel as much as you can to the point where you got to flip that switch. But you better be sure, and we help you, of course, but make sure that you've tested it enough so you know that switch is going to be pretty painless. Always going to be things that crop up. But I hate seeing people on a Friday night all the way into Monday morning, right? Up all weekend fixing something because it didn't go right. That's wrong. That's not what you should do. You should have it tested, ready to go. So when you flip that switch, and there are ways to test these things that don't have duplicates, by the way. So there's ways to do that. But yeah, it's parallel as much as possible, but those flipping the switches, as we call them, have to happen sometimes.
Yep.
All right, great advice. It looks like we are just about out of time. So as we close out the webcast, I'd like to thank Paul and Dave for a great conversation, lots of great info, and also thank our sponsor, Unicon, for making today's event possible. I'd also like to remind you again that this event will be available on demand. Be on the lookout for an email with a link to that recording. Thank you very much for attending, and this concludes today's webcast.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.